My name is Maya, and I am 28 years old. Until very recently, I would have described my family as slightly difficult, but manageable. The kind of family where tension simmers quietly under the surface, never quite boiling over. The kind where you learn early how to keep your expectations low and your reactions even lower. I believed that right up until the day my younger brother got married. My brother Jamal is 25. Growing up, he was always the center of gravity in our household. If something went wrong, it was explained away. If something went right, it was celebrated loudly. I was the older sibling, which meant I was expected to be steady, responsible, invisible when necessary. I learned how to do things on my own because no one ever seemed to worry whether I was being supported. Before we continued, if you're still here, write in the comments. Where are you watching us from? I'll read every message. That pattern never changed. It only got more subtle. So when Jamal announced his wedding, I told myself not to read into anything. It was his day, his life, his moment. I didn't expect to be in the spotlight. I just wanted to show up, sit with family, smile politely, and leave without tension following me home. The first sign came quietly. I wasn't asked to be part of the wedding party. At first, I didn't take it personally. Not every sibling stands beside the bride or groom. But then I noticed who was included. Jamal's college friend, his coworker, someone he met less than a year ago. Even a distant cousin's partner. People I barely knew were suddenly essential to the ceremony. I told myself it didn't matter. Then came the seating chart. The venue was elegant, warm lights reflecting off glass and polished floors. I walked up to the table near the entrance where name cards were arranged alphabetically. I scanned slowly. Parents, aunts, cousins, friends. My name wasn't there. I checked again. Then once more, carefully, as if I had simply overlooked it. Still nothing. I waited until the line behind me grew uncomfortable, then stepped aside and approached one of the event staff. She glanced at her tablet, frowned slightly, then forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, you're right this way." She led me forward, past the wide doors of the ballroom, past the sound of music and laughter, and stopped in the hallway just outside the main room, near the coat rack, near the restrooms. A small table sat alone against the wall, neatly set, almost apologetic in appearance. "This is your seat," she said softly. For a moment, I actually smiled. I thought it had to be temporary, a mistake, something that would be fixed once the reception officially started. I asked her if she was sure. She nodded. That was when it sank in. I wasn't seated with family. I wasn't even seated in the room. I stood there for a long second, listening to the muffled music through the doors, feeling the cool draft from the entrance brush past my legs. I took a breath, straightened my dress, and decided to ask the one person who could explain this. My brother. I found Jamal near the front, laughing with his bride, Brielle, who was glowing in white and gold. When they noticed me approaching, her smile sharpened slightly, like she already knew why I was there. I asked calmly, "Can you tell me why my seat is in the hallway?" Brielle answered before Jamal could. She tilted her head, lips curling into something close to a smirk, and said, very clearly, "Only close family gets a table." And in that moment, I understood something important. This wasn't an oversight. This was a message. For a second, I thought I had misheard her. The words were simple, delivered lightly, almost casually, as if she were commenting on the weather instead of redefining my place in my own family. Jamal didn't say anything. He didn't look surprised either. He just shifted his weight slightly and avoided my eyes. I waited for him to correct her. He didn't. "Close family?" I repeated, keeping my voice steady. "I'm your sister." Brielle smiled again, that same controlled smile that never reached her eyes. Of course, she said, but seating was limited. We had to prioritize. I glanced past her into the ballroom. I could see empty chairs being adjusted, glasses being placed, servers moving between tables. Limited wasn't the word that came to mind. Jamal finally spoke. It's not a big deal, Maya. It's just a seat. Just a seat. Just a hallway. Just a quiet way of being pushed aside. Our mother appeared beside us then, drawn by the tension. She placed a hand on Jamal's arm and looked at me with that familiar expression. Half concern, half warning. Please, don't do this right now, she said softly. It's his wedding day. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't accused anyone. I had only asked a question. Still, somehow, I was already the problem. I'm not trying to cause anything, I said. I just want to understand why I'm not sitting with the family. Brielle let out a small laugh. You don't really come around much anymore, she said. You've got your own life. It's different now. Different. That word again. The same word people use when they want distance without admitting it. I nodded slowly. So that's it? She shrugged. It's not personal, but it was, and we all knew it. I looked at Jamal one more time. He met my gaze briefly, then looked away. That was answer enough. I walked back toward the hallway table alone. The coat rack stood beside it, heavy with jackets and scarves. Guests passed by without noticing me, heading toward warmth and music while I sat just outside of it all. I told myself I could handle it. I had handled worse. Years of being overlooked had taught me how to sit quietly with discomfort and pretend it didn't matter. But as I sat there, listening to laughter through the doors, something shifted. This wasn't about ego. It wasn't even about respect. It was about being told, very clearly, that I didn't belong. A server stopped briefly and placed a glass of water in front of me. She hesitated, then gave me a sympathetic look before moving on. I wondered what she thought, what anyone would think, seeing a single table in a hallway with one person sitting at it. I took a slow sip and let my eyes drift toward the open doors. And that was when I realized something else. Brielle wasn't uncomfortable at all. She was watching me. Every now and then, her gaze flicked toward the hallway, checking to see if I was still there. Still sitting. Still accepting it. That was when I understood this wasn't just exclusion. It was intentional, and I wasn't sure yet what I was going to do about it. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to quietly disappear. I stayed where I was for a while, longer than I probably should have. Not because I didn't know what to do, but because I needed time to understand what I was feeling. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was something quieter, heavier, the kind of realization that settles in slowly, the kind that forces you to revisit years of small moments you once dismissed. Holidays where my presence felt optional. Conversations that stopped when I entered the room. Decisions made without me, explained afterward as afterthoughts. I had always told myself I was imagining it. Now I knew I wasn't. I stood up and smoothed my dress, forcing my shoulders back. If I was going to be sidelined, I wasn't going to look small while it happened. As I walked back toward the ballroom entrance, I noticed a few guests glance at me with confusion. One woman frowned slightly, clearly trying to understand why anyone would be seated out there alone. Inside, the music swelled. Glasses clinked. Laughter rose and fell in waves. I stepped just inside the doorway, close enough to be seen, far enough to still feel separate. That was when Brielle approached me again. She moved with purpose, heels clicking softly against the floor, expression perfectly composed. Jamal stayed behind her, speaking to someone else, as if this had nothing to do with him. "I hope you're comfortable," she said, lowering her voice. There was something rehearsed about her tone, like she'd practiced sounding gracious. "I'm fine," I replied, and I meant it in the most literal way possible. I was standing. I was breathing. I wasn't causing a scene. She studied me for a moment, then leaned in slightly. "You know," she said, "weddings are about boundaries, about starting a new chapter with the people who matter most." I met her eyes. "And you decided I wasn't one of them?" Her lips curved upward, not denying it, not confirming it either. "Only close family gets a table," she repeated, softer this time, as if reminding me of my place. Something about the way she said it, slow, deliberate, made my chest tighten. I nodded once. "Understood." That seemed to satisfy her. She straightened, glanced toward the head table, then turned and walked away as if the conversation were closed. But for me, it wasn't. I looked around the room again, at the people seated comfortably, at the space that had been intentionally withheld from me. And then, unexpectedly, another thought surfaced. Brielle didn't look nervous. She didn't look unsure. She looked confident. Confident people don't usually poke at others unless they think they're safe from consequences. And that was when I remembered something. I had grown up with Jamal. I knew his habits, his stories, the things he complained about late at night when he thought no one else was listening. And more importantly, I knew what he had told me, more than once, about Brielle. I hadn't planned on saying anything. I truly hadn't. I came to this wedding prepared to endure, not to confront. But standing there, just inside the door, I realized something had already changed. I had been pushed out, publicly, deliberately. And suddenly, staying silent no longer felt like maturity. It felt like permission. I didn't move right away. I let the noise of the room wash over me, the music, the clinking glasses, the rehearsed happiness. On the surface, everything looked perfect. But once you know where to look, cracks are easy to see. Jamal was laughing too loudly. Brielle was holding his arm just a little too tightly. I stepped fully back into the room, not toward the hallway this time, but closer to the cluster of tables near the front. A few conversations quieted as I passed. People noticed. It's hard not to notice someone who looks like they're supposed to belong, but doesn't have a place to sit. That's when Brielle's mother leaned toward her and whispered something. Brielle's eyes flicked to me again. The smirk was gone now, replaced by calculation. I could have walked out. I could have taken the quiet exit and let them tell whatever story they wanted about why I left early. But something stopped me. All my life, I had been the one who absorbed discomfort so others wouldn't have to. I swallowed comments. I smoothed tension. I made myself smaller to keep the peace. And where had that gotten me? A table in a hallway. I approached the edge of the head table and paused. Jamal finally noticed me then. His smile faltered. "Maya," he said, "what's going on?" I kept my voice calm, almost gentle. "I just wanted to clear something up." Brielle stiffened beside him. "You said only close family gets a table," I continued, glancing briefly at her, then back to Jamal. "I just want to understand when I stopped counting." A few heads turned. The people closest to us leaned in, pretending not to listen while catching every word. Jamal opened his mouth, then closed it again. He looked at Brielle, waiting for her to speak. She did. "We've been over this," she said, her tone sharper now. "This isn't the time." "I agree," I said. It would have been better to talk about it before seating me next to the coat rack. A ripple of quiet spread through the table. Someone cleared their throat. Someone else shifted uncomfortably in their chair. Brielle's cheeks flushed. "You're being dramatic." "No," I replied. "I'm being specific." That was when I noticed it. The way her eyes darted around. The way her posture changed. She hadn't expected me to say anything. She had expected me to accept it. And suddenly, I realized something else. This wasn't just about me. This was about control. Brielle wanted to establish it early, on her wedding day, in front of everyone. She wanted to show where I ranked in this new version of the family. The problem was, she assumed I would play along. She assumed wrong. I took a slow breath. "I don't want to disrupt anything," I said evenly, "but I won't pretend this wasn't intentional." The room was very quiet now. Jamal finally spoke, his voice low. "Can we talk about this later?" I met his eyes. "We already are." And somewhere behind us, I heard a chair scrape against the floor as someone stood up, drawn in by the tension. The attention was shifting, and once it starts, it's hard to stop. The silence stretched longer than anyone expected it to. Long enough for people to stop pretending they weren't listening. Long enough for the music to feel too loud, then suddenly too quiet when someone near the DJ turned it down. Brielle was the first to recover. She let out a small laugh, the kind meant to signal that this was nothing, that I was overreacting. "This really isn't appropriate," she said. "Today is about Jamal and me." "I agree," I replied, "which is why I didn't bring this up. I was fine sitting quietly until you made it clear that my place was intentional." Jamal rubbed his face with one hand. He looked tired. Not confused, not shocked, just tired, and that hurt more than anger would have. "You could have just asked me," he said quietly. "I did," I answered, "and you let her answer for you." That landed. His jaw tightened. He looked at Brielle again, and for the first time that day, there was something uneasy in his expression. Brielle noticed it too. She straightened her shoulders. "I was just being honest," she said. "We had limited space. We made choices. That's all." "Choices say things," I replied. "Even when no one wants to admit it." Around us, guests had gone very still. A woman I recognized from our extended family glanced between Jamal and me, brows furrowed. Someone else leaned back slightly, clearly uncomfortable but unable to look away. Brielle crossed her arms. "So, what do you want? An apology? A chair?" I thought about that for a moment. "No," I said. "I wanted to know if this was how you really see me, and now I do." Her eyes narrowed. "You're making a scene." I smiled faintly. Funny, no one said that when I was being quietly humiliated. That was when Jamal's best man shifted beside him and muttered something under his breath. One of the bridesmaids glanced at Brielle, then quickly looked away. The energy in the room was changing, subtle but undeniable. Brielle could feel it slipping. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "You weren't excluded, you were seated, just not at a main table." "In the hallway," I said calmly, "with the coats." Someone near the back let out a soft, involuntary laugh. It wasn't loud, but it carried. Brielle's face hardened instantly. She turned to Jamal. "Are you really going to let this happen?" He hesitated. That hesitation said everything. For the first time since I arrived, I felt something solid settle in my chest. Not rage, not satisfaction, clarity. I wasn't fighting for a seat. I was witnessing a truth. And Brielle was realizing that her quiet little power move had just become very, very public. Brielle took a step closer to Jamal, her hand sliding onto his arm again, this time not affectionate, but possessive. She leaned in and whispered something to him, sharp and quick. I didn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. His shoulders stiffened immediately. Maya, he said, turning back to me. Can you just drop this? There it was. Not is this wrong? Not, are you okay? Just drop it. I nodded slowly. I already did, I said, back when I sat down where you put me. That answer didn't please either of them. Brielle exhaled sharply. You're acting like we committed some huge offense. You didn't forget my seat, I replied. You chose it. She opened her mouth to argue again, but someone else spoke first. I'm sorry. A woman's voice cut in, hesitant but clear. One of the bridesmaids. She looked uncomfortable, eyes flicking between Brielle and me. I thought family usually sat together. The words were soft, but they landed like weight. Brielle's head snapped toward her. This is not your concern. The bridesmaid flushed and stepped back, but the damage was done. The thought was now out in the open. People were thinking it, even if they weren't saying it. I hadn't planned to speak again, truly. But the air felt charged now, and silence would only help one side. I don't want to take over your wedding, I said evenly. I came here to support my brother. I stayed quiet until I was told, directly, that I didn't count as close family. Brielle's voice rose. Because you don't act like it? That was new. I tilted my head slightly. Explain. You're distant, she said, her words coming faster now. You're not around. You're not involved. You don't even try. Family shows up. I nodded once, absorbing that. I did show up, she scoffed. Physically sure. Jamal looked between us, tension etched into his face. Both of you, please. But Brielle wasn't done. This is exactly what I meant, she said. You always do this. You make things uncomfortable and then act innocent about it. I felt a quiet shift inside me. Something clicked into place. No, I said calmly. I make things visible. She stared at me, clearly not liking that answer. Around us, people were openly watching now. Conversations had stopped entirely at nearby tables. The DJ stood frozen, hands hovering over his equipment, unsure whether to restart the music. Brielle's voice dropped, tight with irritation. You should just leave if you're this unhappy. I met her gaze. I will, but not because I'm embarrassed. That seemed to catch her off guard. I glanced once more at Jamal. I hope this was worth it, I said quietly. Because moments like this don't disappear once the music comes back on. For a split second, something like doubt flickered across his face. Then Brielle squeezed his arm again. And just like that, it was gone. I turned slightly, preparing to walk away, when I noticed how tense Brielle had become. Her confidence had shifted into something sharper, more brittle. She had expected obedience. What she was getting instead was attention she could no longer control. As I stepped back, she spoke again, louder this time. You know, she said, her voice carrying farther than before. This is exactly why we didn't want you at a main table. I stopped. The room seemed to lean in. I turned back slowly. And why is that? She lifted her chin. Because you have a habit of making things about yourself. You always have. That was the moment something inside me went very still. For years I had swallowed that accusation. Anytime I spoke up, it was framed as drama. Anytime I expressed discomfort, it became selfishness. I had learned how to disappear so well that people forgot it was a choice. I looked at her carefully. I've been sitting alone in a hallway for most of the night, I said. I didn't say a word until you told me I wasn't close family. If that's making it about myself, Then maybe we have different definitions. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Brielle's eyes flicked around again, measuring reactions. She didn't like what she saw. Jamal cleared his throat. Can we please move past this? I studied him for a long second. We could have, I said, but you didn't stop it when it mattered. His shoulders sagged slightly. He didn't argue. That silence was louder than anything else. Brielle laughed again, but this time it sounded forced. This is ridiculous. People are staring. They started staring when you decided to seat me like a problem instead of a person, I replied. Someone near the back shook their head quietly. Another guest leaned toward their partner and whispered something I couldn't hear. Brielle's face flushed deeper. I was trying to protect the atmosphere. No, I said. You were testing boundaries. She stiffened. Excuse me? You wanted to see how much you could get away with, I continued, my voice calm, almost conversational. You wanted to see if I would accept being minimized in public. Jamal looked sharply at her now. Brielle! She cut him off. Don't. That single word did more damage than she realized. A few people exchanged looks. The bridesmaid who had spoken earlier stared down at her hands. Someone at the edge of the room shifted their chair, clearly uncomfortable. Brielle had lost the room, and she knew it. She turned back to me, eyes cold. If you're done, you should go. I nodded. I am done. But I wasn't finished. I took a step toward the exit, then stopped again. Not because I wanted to prolong the moment, but because something important had just surfaced in my mind. Brielle had been very confident tonight. Confident enough to humiliate me openly. Confident enough to assume I would stay quiet. Confident enough to think there would be no consequences. People only act that way when they believe they're untouchable. I turned back once more, slower this time. Not confrontational. Not emotional. Just deliberate. Before I go, I said, there's something I want to clarify. Brielle rolled her eyes. Of course there is. I ignored her tone and looked instead at Jamal. You and I grew up together, I said, which means I've heard you talk. A lot. His expression tightened immediately. Brielle's posture changed, subtle but noticeable. She straightened, alert now. I wasn't planning to say anything, I continued. I came here to be polite, to celebrate you. But since we're being honest tonight, I think it's fair to stop pretending. What are you talking about? Brielle asked sharply. I turned to her, meeting her gaze evenly. You know how you said only close family gets a table? She nodded, chin raised. I smiled faintly. It's interesting, because Jamal has spent months telling me how stressed he was about this wedding, especially about how certain people might behave. Jamal swallowed. Maya. I kept my eyes on Brielle. He was worried about speeches, about appearances, about comments being made that might ruin the vibe. Brielle's smile vanished. That's not true. I shrugged lightly. Those were his words. He said he hoped no one would make things uncomfortable, that some people had a habit of drawing attention to themselves. A hush settled over the nearest tables. Brielle's eyes flicked to Jamal. Did you say that? He didn't answer right away. I continued gently. He also mentioned how hard it was for him to keep the peace at home. How exhausting it was to constantly smooth things over. How he felt like he was always walking on eggshells. That one landed. Brielle's face hardened. You're lying. I finally looked at Jamal again. Am I? He looked away. The reaction around us shifted instantly. People weren't just watching anymore. They were connecting dots. Brielle's confidence cracked just enough for irritation to seep through. This is inappropriate. I agree, I said. But so is seating me in a hallway and calling it family policy. Her jaw clenched. You're trying to embarrass me. No, I replied calmly. I'm explaining why your words mattered. For the first time that evening, Brielle looked uncertain. And uncertainty, once exposed, has a way of spreading. Brielle took a sharp breath, the kind people take when they're trying to keep control of their voice. You're twisting things, she said. You're taking private conversations and turning them into drama. I nodded. That's one way to see it. Jamal finally spoke, his voice low. Maya, stop. I looked at him, really looked at him. You asked me to drop it earlier, I said. I did. You didn't. That landed harder than anything else I'd said. Brielle turned fully toward him now. Is any of this true? He hesitated, just for a moment, but that moment was enough. It's not like that, he said. I was just stressed. I didn't mean. She pulled her arm away from him. The gesture was small, but the shift was obvious. So you have been complaining about me, she said. Jamal's mouth opened, then closed again. I vented. Everyone vents. About me, she repeated, to your sister. Around us, the room felt frozen. People were openly staring now. No one was pretending anymore. I spoke again, carefully. He told me you hated feeling judged, that you were worried people would criticize your choices, that you were afraid someone might make it all about themselves. Brielle let out a short, humorless laugh. Wow! She looked at Jamal with something close to disbelief. So this is what you think of me? That's not what I said, he insisted. But you said something, she shot back. I took a step back, giving them space. I wasn't here to fight their battle. I had already said enough. Brielle turned to the nearest table, then back to us. So let me get this straight, she said loudly. I'm the villain because I didn't want negative energy at my wedding? No one answered. Silence can be devastating when you're expecting support. She turned back to me, eyes sharp. You enjoyed this. I considered that honestly. No, I said. I didn't enjoy any of it, but I won't pretend it didn't matter. Her gaze flicked to the hallway, to the small table still sitting there, empty now. The visual did more than any argument could. One of the older relatives near the back cleared her throat. I've never seen a sibling seated outside the room before, she said quietly. Brielle's face flushed. This is getting ridiculous. Jamal looked shaken now, not angry, not defensive, shaken. I think we need a minute, he said to Brielle. She stared at him. You're choosing this? I'm choosing to talk, he replied. That distinction mattered more than he realized. I took another step back. I'm going to leave, I said. Not because I was asked to, because I've said what I needed to say. No one stopped me this time. As I turned toward the exit, the tension behind me felt heavy, unresolved, and very public. And I knew something else, too. The wedding wasn't going to simply continue like nothing had happened. Some things, once exposed, refused to stay buried. I walked toward the exit slowly, aware of every step, every glance that followed me. The music hadn't started again. No one tried to stop me. That silence stayed with me all the way through the doors and into the cooler air outside the ballroom. Once I reached the hallway, I paused beside the small table that had been assigned to me. The glass of water was still there, untouched now. The place card with my name sat neatly in front of an empty chair. For a moment, I just looked at it. It struck me how deliberate it all had been. The placement, the wording, the confidence with which Brielle had said what she said. That hadn't been a mistake made under stress. That had been a decision. I picked up my purse and turned away from the table for the last time. As I walked down the corridor toward the main exit, I could hear raised voices starting behind the closed ballroom doors, not clear enough to make out words, but sharp enough to tell the tone had shifted. Whatever calm Brielle had tried to preserve was gone now. Outside, the night air felt heavy but grounding. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly, like I'd been holding it in for years without realizing. My phone buzzed almost immediately, a text from my mother. "Why would you do this tonight?" I stared at the screen for a long moment, then locked the phone without responding. I wasn't ready to explain myself to someone who had watched me be sidelined my entire life, and only noticed when I finally stopped accepting it. I had barely reached my car when another message came through. This time from Jamal. "Can we talk?" I leaned against the driver's door, eyes closed, phone resting loosely in my hand. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Part of me knew this conversation had been overdue for a long time. "Not tonight," I typed back. "You made your choice tonight. We'll talk later." There was no reply. As I drove away from the venue, the lights in my rearview mirror grew smaller. I wondered how long it would take before the full weight of the evening settled in for everyone still inside. Weddings have a way of exposing fault lines people work very hard to hide. And once they're visible, pretending they don't exist becomes impossible. I didn't know what the fallout would look like yet, but I knew this much. I had finally stepped out of the hallway. I didn't sleep much that night. My phone stayed face down on the nightstand, but I could feel it vibrating every few minutes, like a persistent pulse. Messages, missed calls, voicemails I didn't have the energy to hear yet. By morning, I finally checked. My mother had left several messages. Her tone shifted with each one, confused, upset, pleading, then frustrated. The common thread was clear. Somehow, what happened at the wedding had become my responsibility to fix. Jamal had sent one more message just after midnight. "Brielle is really upset. This got out of hand." I stared at that sentence for a long time. Got out of hand, as if it had been a spill, an accident. Something no one could have anticipated. I didn't reply. Later that day, my father called. He rarely got involved in family conflict. When he did, it usually meant something had gone very wrong. "Maya," he said after a pause. "I heard what happened." I waited. "I don't agree with how you were treated," he continued slowly. "But the timing? There's never a good time to be told you don't count," I replied quietly. He sighed. "I know." That was it. No lecture, no demand for an apology. Just that acknowledgement. It was more than I'd expected. Over the next few days, bits and pieces filtered back to me. The reception never fully recovered. People noticed the tension. Conversations shifted. Brielle had disappeared for a while with Jamal. Some guests left early. Apparently, the phrase she'd used, "only close family gets a table," had circulated faster than anyone anticipated. Once words like that are spoken publicly, they don't belong to just one person anymore. Jamal called again 2 days later. This time, I answered. "We're not okay," he admitted. "Brielle feels humiliated." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. "She humiliated herself. She thinks you planned it," he said, "that you wanted to embarrass her." "I wanted to sit with my family," I replied. "Everything after that was a reaction?" There was a long silence on the line. "She says you crossed a line," he said finally. "I know," I answered, "and she crossed it first." He didn't argue. That was when I realized something important. This wasn't about a single night anymore. This was about a dynamic that had finally been challenged. And once challenged, It couldn't simply return to what it was before. Over the next week, the story of the wedding shifted depending on who was telling it. In my mother's version, emotions ran high and misunderstandings happened. In Brielle's version, I had deliberately sabotaged her day. In Jamal's version, everything had spiraled before he could stop it. No one mentioned the hallway table unless I brought it up. That omission told me everything. Jamal came by my apartment a few days later. He looked exhausted, like someone who hadn't slept enough but hadn't rested either. We sat across from each other, the silence heavy but not hostile. "She wants you to apologize," he said eventually. "For what?" I asked. "For embarrassing her, for bringing private things into public." I folded my hands in my lap. "Does she want to apologize for saying I wasn't close family?" He looked down. "She doesn't think she needs to." "That's the problem," I replied. He rubbed his forehead. "She says if you just admit you overreacted, we can all move on." I shook my head slowly. Moving on without accountability just means it happens again. Maybe not to me, maybe to someone else. He didn't respond right away. When he finally looked up, his expression was conflicted. I didn't realize how bad it was until everyone started talking. "That's usually how it goes," I said. "Silence protects patterns." When he left, nothing was resolved. But something had shifted. He couldn't unsee it now, and neither could I. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel guilty for holding my ground. Weeks passed. The calls slowed. The messages became shorter, more careful. Family gatherings were postponed. No one wanted to be the first to bring everything back into the open. I heard through relatives that Brielle was still angry. Not loud anger, controlled anger, the kind that waits. She told people I was difficult, that I'd always been distant, that I didn't understand boundaries. I didn't correct the narrative. I had spent too many years explaining myself to people who only listened when it benefited them. Jamal and I spoke occasionally, cautiously. Our conversations stayed on the surface. Work, weather, neutral ground. But underneath it all, there was a question neither of us asked out loud. What does family mean when it's conditional? I thought about that a lot, about how easy it is to mistake tolerance for peace, about how often women are taught that grace means silence. I had lost my seat at a table that night, but I had gained clarity, and clarity has a way of rearranging priorities. A month after the wedding, my mother invited me to coffee. She looked older than I remembered, not physically, but in the way people do when they're forced to confront something they've avoided for years. "I didn't realize how alone you felt," she said quietly. I stirred my drink without looking up. "I didn't either, not until it was obvious." She nodded. "I should have said something that day." "Yes," I replied, not harshly, not gently, just honestly. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. It wasn't an apology, but it was a start. I didn't know what my relationship with Jamal and Brielle would look like in the future. Maybe it would heal, maybe it wouldn't. Some damage doesn't reverse neatly. But I knew this much. I would never again accept a seat in the hallway of my own life. Time has a way of settling things into their proper places. The wedding became a story people stopped retelling. Jamal and Brielle settled into their marriage, carrying with them the consequences of that first public test. I stayed where I was, steady, no longer bending to keep things comfortable for everyone else. I didn't regret speaking up. If you listened to the end, thank you. It means more to me than you know. And before we finish, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like. It really helps our channel grow and allows us to release new stories every single day. Sometimes, the moment that changes everything isn't loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's the quiet decision to stand up, walk away, and refuse to be placed where you don't belong. And once you do that, there's no going back. For another story that fits your mood, click the video on the left. To hear the latest one, choose the video on the right.
For 35 years, I was the invisible daughter, the one whose birthday was forgotten, whose achievements went unnoticed, whose presence at family dinners felt like an inconvenience rather than a celebration. But I never expected my own sister to hand me a wrapped box at my birthday dinner, smirk at the entire table, and say, "Maybe this DNA test will finally explain why you've always been another man's mistake in this family." The laughter that followed still echoes in my mind. Mom's nervous giggle, Dad's silence, the way Lily's eyes glittered with something that looked less like humor and more like hunger. I took that test, not because she wanted me to, but because I needed to know why she was so eager for me to take it. 3 months later, our family's estate lawyer called an urgent meeting. When Mom and Lily walked in and saw me sitting there with my own attorney, their faces went white. They thought they were burying me with that DNA test. They didn't know they were digging their own graves. Have you ever discovered that the people who were supposed to love you had been plotting against you all along? My name is Emily Carter. I'm 35 years old, a financial analyst who built her career through discipline and determination qualities I developed because no one in my family ever handed me anything. While my younger sister Lily received praise for simply existing, I learned early that my accomplishments would be met with indifference at best, criticism at worst. The drive to my parents' house felt longer than usual that evening. 3 months had passed since Dad's funeral, and this would be my first time back for what Mom called a small birthday dinner. I wasn't expecting celebration. I had stopped expecting that years ago. But something about Mom's voice on the phone had sounded strange, too bright, too casual, as if she were reading from a script someone else had written. When I walked through the front door, the first thing I noticed was laughter. Mom and Lily sat at the kitchen table flipping through a vacation brochure discussing beach resorts and spa packages. 3 months after burying their husband and father, they were planning tropical getaways. The grief that had consumed the funeral seemed to have evaporated entirely. I set down the bottle of wine I'd brought and kissed Mom on the cheek. She flinched slightly before recovering with a too-wide smile. Lily didn't bother getting up, just waved her fingers in my direction without looking away from the brochure. During dinner, I tried asking about the will reading. It had been 3 months, far longer than the usual timeline. Mom's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. "We're just not ready yet, sweetheart. Still grieving." She glanced at Lily, who smoothly redirected the conversation to her recent promotion at work. I watched them exchange looks throughout the meal. Quick, nervous glances that carried entire conversations I wasn't meant to understand. They were coordinating something. I was certain of it. The dinner conversation orbited entirely around Lily, her children's achievements, her husband's new car, her plans to renovate their kitchen. When Mom finally acknowledged my existence, it was with a single question. "Still at that same accounting firm?" Before I could answer, Lily interrupted with another story about herself. But tonight felt different from the usual neglect. Lily kept watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read, anticipation, perhaps, like a cat watching a mouse approach a trap. Mom drank more wine than I'd ever seen her consume, her eyes sliding away from mine whenever I tried to meet them. Then came the gift. Lily slid a wrapped box across the table, her lips curving into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Happy birthday, Emily. I thought this might help answer some questions you've probably had your whole life." Inside was a DNA testing kit. "Maybe this will finally explain why you've always been so different from the rest of us," Lily said, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. "Who knows what secrets are hiding in your genes? You should definitely send it in. Don't you want to know who you really are?" The table erupted in laughter, but I noticed Mom's hands trembling around her wineglass, her knuckles white against the stem. And Lily's joke had felt rehearsed, delivered with the precision of something practiced in front of a mirror. That night I couldn't sleep. I found myself in my old bedroom searching through boxes I hadn't touched in years. In the back of my closet, I discovered an envelope already opened, the contents carelessly stuffed back inside. The dust pattern around it had been disturbed recently. Inside was a photograph of me as a baby, held by a man I had never seen before. On the back, in my mother's handwriting, were 2 words, "Forgive me." I photographed everything with my phone. Then I picked up the DNA kit Lily had given me and made a decision. I would send it in, not because my sister wanted me to, but because I needed to understand why she was so eager for me to discover I wasn't really a Carter. Whatever trap Lily was setting, I intended to find it before it found me. I mailed the DNA test kit the very next morning. The company promised results within 4 to 6 weeks, so I used that time to do my own research. I started with the photograph, the unknown man holding baby me, my mother's plea for forgiveness written on the back. I scanned his face, searching for any resemblance to people my parents had known, but found nothing. The image quality was too poor for any facial recognition software to help. So I waited, and I watched, and I paid attention to every nervous glance my mother sent my way during our brief phone calls. The results arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, exactly 5 weeks after I had sent my sample. I opened the email at my desk during lunch, expecting confirmation of what I had already begun to suspect. What I found was both simpler and more complicated than I had imagined. No biological relationship detected with the Carter family reference samples. The words sat on my screen like a verdict. I was not my father's daughter. The man who had raised me, who had paid for my education, who had looked at me with what I now realized was a complicated mixture of duty and distance he had known. He must have known. And he had kept me anyway, even if he had never quite managed to love me the way he loved Lily. But the report contained something else. The DNA database had identified a genetic match, a connection to the family of a man named Richard Hayes. The system suggested he could be a close biological relative, possibly a father or uncle. The name meant nothing to me, so I did what any analyst would do. I researched. Richard Hayes had been a successful entrepreneur who built his fortune in commercial real estate during the 1980s and 90s. He had died 5 years ago, leaving behind a substantial estate and no immediate family. But what caught my attention was an article from 34 years ago, buried deep in an archived business journal. The headline read, "Local Investor Saves Struggling Manufacturing Firm." The firm was Carter Industries, my father's company. Richard Hayes had provided the capital that kept my family's business alive during its darkest period, right around the time I was born. I sat back in my chair, my mind racing through the implications. My mother had an affair with the man who saved my father's business. I was the result. And somehow everyone had agreed to keep the secret for 35 years. But why would Lily want this exposed now? I decided to force the issue. That evening, I took a screenshot of my DNA results and sent it to our family group chat with a single question. Anyone want to explain this? The reactions came quickly, and they told me everything I needed to know. Mom called within minutes, her voice thick with tears. She begged me to delete the message to let this go, to understand that some secrets were buried for good reasons. She talked about how complicated things had been back then, how she had made mistakes, how Dad had forgiven her, and they had all moved forward as a family. She never once apologized to me. She never acknowledged that I had spent 35 years feeling like an outsider in my own home because of a lie she had told. But it was Lily's response that confirmed my suspicions. She didn't call. She sent a text message, and her words carried no shock, no confusion, no sisterly concern, just cold satisfaction. Well, now you know. I guess that changes things, doesn't it? She had expected this. She had wanted this. The DNA test wasn't a cruel joke, it was the first move in a game I didn't yet understand. I called her that night demanding answers. The conversation started tense and escalated quickly. Lily had always been skilled at deflection, at turning every accusation back on the accuser, but this time her mask slipped. When I accused her of planning this, of deliberately exposing the secret for some purpose I couldn't yet see, she lost control. "I have protected this family's secrets for 20 years, she screamed into the phone. 20 years of keeping my mouth shut while you got to play the innocent victim, and now I'm going to make sure the right people get what they deserve." The line went dead. She had hung up on me. But those words echoed in my mind long after the call ended. 20 years. Lily had known since she was 16 years old, nearly 2 decades of holding this information, using it, weaponizing it. I thought back to all the times Mom had sided with Lily over me, all the financial gifts that flowed in one direction, all the excuses made for Lily's behavior while I was held to impossible standards. I had always assumed Mom simply loved her more. Now I understood the truth. Lily had been blackmailing our mother for 20 years, and every privilege she received was the price of her silence. But something had changed. Lily no longer wanted to keep the secret, she wanted it exposed. And her words about making sure the right people get what they deserve suggested this was about more than just family drama. This was about money. This was about the inheritance. I started asking careful questions to family friends, people who had known my parents for decades. What I learned made my blood run cold. One of my mother's closest friends mentioned almost as an afterthought that Lily had been asking about inheritance lawyers several months ago, before Dad had even gotten sick. Another recalled Lily talking about upcoming changes to the family situation, speaking as if she knew something no one else did. I couldn't prove anything. I had no documents, no recordings, no concrete evidence of whatever scheme Lily was executing, but I had spent my entire career analyzing patterns, identifying risks, preparing for scenarios that others dismissed as unlikely. My instincts had never failed me in business, and they were screaming at me now. I found an attorney the next day, not a family friend, not someone connected to anyone my mother or sister might know, but an independent estate lawyer with a reputation for protecting clients in complicated inheritance situations. I explained my concerns, shared what little I knew, and asked her to help me understand my rights as a potential beneficiary of my father's estate. She listened without judgment, took detailed notes, and promised to investigate. 3 days later, a different call came. This one was from Mr. Harrison, the attorney who had handled my father's legal affairs for over 30 years. His voice was formal but not unkind. "Emily, there are things your father wanted you to know," he said. "Things he instructed me to share only under specific circumstances. Those circumstances have now been met. It's time for the will reading, and I think you should be prepared for what you're going to hear." I agreed to attend the reading scheduled for the following week. Then I called my own attorney and asked her to accompany me. Whatever trap Lily had set, I was about to walk straight into it. But this time I would not be walking in blind. The law office of Harrison and Associates occupied the entire top floor of a downtown building that had stood since my grandfather's time. I arrived 20 minutes early with my attorney Sarah Chen, who had advised me to observe everything and say nothing unless directly addressed. We took seats near the window, away from the main conference table, and waited. Mom arrived next, looking as though she had aged 10 years in the past month. Her face was pale, her hands clutched her purse like a lifeline, and she avoided my eyes completely as she took a seat at the far end of the table. She knew something was coming. The question was whether she knew exactly what. Lily swept in 5 minutes before the scheduled time, and the transformation in her demeanor told me everything. She was practically glowing with anticipation, dressed in her most expensive suit, her makeup perfect, her smile barely contained. She had brought her own attorney, a sharp-faced man I recognized from billboards advertising aggressive estate litigation. Lily caught my eye and gave me a look of such smug satisfaction that I felt my stomach tighten. She believed she had already won. Mr. Harrison entered last, carrying a thick folder that he placed deliberately at the center of the table. He was a man in his late 60s, distinguished and careful, someone who had known my family for decades. But today, his expression carried something I had never seen before, a quiet resolve, as if he were about to deliver news he had been waiting years to share. "Before we proceed," he began, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade, "I want to note that Mr. Carter gave me very specific instructions about how this reading should be conducted. He anticipated certain challenges to his final wishes, and he prepared accordingly. Everything I am about to share was arranged by your father during the final months of his life with full knowledge of circumstances that some of you may find surprising." Lily shifted in her seat, her smile faltering slightly. This was not how she had expected things to begin. Mr. Harrison opened the folder and began to read. "I, Robert James Carter, being of sound mind and body, declare this to be my last will and testament. I leave 70% of my estate, including the family home, my investment portfolio, and my ownership stake in Carter Industries, to Emily Carter, the daughter I chose to love not because of blood, but because of character." The room exploded. Lily was on her feet before the last word left his mouth. "This is exactly what I expected," she shouted, her composure shattering completely. "She is not his real daughter. We have DNA proof, now proof, that she submitted herself. She has no legal claim to any of this." Mr. Harrison waited for her outburst to subside, then continued reading with infuriating calm. "The will states, and I quote directly, 'I have known, since Emily was 2 years old, that she is not my biological child. I chose to raise her anyway, and I choose to leave her my legacy because she alone has proven worthy of it. This decision was made with full knowledge of Emily's parentage and requires no further validation.'" Graço. The color drained from Lily's face so quickly I thought she might faint. Her entire strategy, the DNA test, the months of preparation, the careful exposure of my true parentage had just been rendered meaningless by a single paragraph. Dad had known. He had always known. And he had chosen me anyway. Mom began to cry softly, her shoulders shaking. But I could not tell if her tears were from grief relief or fear of what was still to come. Mr. Harrison was not finished. He reached into the folder and withdrew a thick stack of documents bound with a rubber band. 8 months before his death, Mr. Carter hired a private investigator. He did so after Lily began pressuring him to modify his will in her favor. The investigator was instructed to document any activities that might indicate an attempt to manipulate the estate distribution. He slid the documents across the table toward Lily, who stared at them as if they might bite her. "The report contains the following findings," Mr. Harrison continued. "Consultations with 3 separate estate litigation attorneys beginning 7 months before Mr. Carter's death. Unauthorized withdrawals totaling $50,000 from Mr. Carter's personal accounts during the period of his illness when he was too weak to monitor his finances closely. multiple conversations with family friends regarding, and I quote from the transcripts, upcoming changes to the family situation, and making sure the right people get what they deserve. Each item landed like a hammer blow. I watched Lily's confident facade crumble piece by piece as the scope of her exposure became clear. And finally, Mr. Harrison said, his voice taking on a harder edge, the investigator documented the purchase of a DNA testing kit bought online 3 weeks before Emily's birthday, shipped to Lily's home address, and gift-wrapped for presentation at a family dinner. He placed a final document on the table, a handwritten note in my father's familiar script. Mr. Carter asked that I read this aloud. Lily, I knew what you were planning. I watched you scheme and manipulate for months, hoping you would change course. I gave you every opportunity to choose differently. You did not. These consequences are of your own making. The silence that followed was absolute. Even Lily's attorney seemed stunned by the thoroughness of the trap that had been laid. Then Lily found her voice again, though it had lost all its earlier confidence. I am contesting this will, she announced, her words tumbling out in a desperate rush. This is obviously the result of manipulation. Emily must have influenced him somehow. I will take this to court and prove that she took advantage of a dying man. Her own attorney grabbed her arm and whispered urgently in her ear. I caught fragments of his warning, explicitly acknowledges, cannot claim fraud when disclosed. Any challenge will be frivolous. Lily shook him off. Mr. Harrison responded without emotion. The will contains a no contest clause valid under California law. Any heir who files a challenge without probable cause forfeits their entire inheritance. Given that the will explicitly acknowledges Emily's parentage and provides documented reasoning for Mr. Carter's decisions, any challenge on grounds of fraud or undue influence would almost certainly be deemed frivolous by the court. He paused, letting the implications sink in. Additionally, your $200,000 in outstanding loans from Mr. Carter are documented in these files as advances on your inheritance. If you forfeit your inheritance through a frivolous challenge, these advances convert to personal debts owed to the estate, debts that would need to be repaid in full. Lily's attorney was already gathering his papers, his expression making clear that he wanted no part of this case. Lily stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing without sound, the full weight of her miscalculation finally crushing her. She had spent months building a case to prove I was not a Carter. She had not known that Dad spent those same months building a fortress around me, documenting her every move, anticipating her every argument. But as the shock of the moment began to settle, Mr. Harrison cleared his throat once more. There is one additional matter, he said, reaching for another envelope at the bottom of his folder. This pertains to an agreement made 35 years ago, an agreement that involves Emily's biological father. I was instructed to share this only after the primary will reading was complete. I felt my heart stop. The secret that had started everything was about to surface, and it would change everything I thought I knew about who I really was. The weeks following the will reading should have brought peace. Instead, they brought chaos. Lily refused to accept what had happened. Her attorney withdrew from her case the day after the reading, but she found another one willing to take her money and file a formal contest against the will. The grounds she claimed were undue influence and manipulation of a dying man, accusations so baseless they would have been laughable if they had not been so vicious. But Lily did not stop at legal action. 3 days after filing the contest, she appeared at my apartment building, pounding on my door and screaming threats loud enough for my neighbors to hear. She called me a thief, a fraud, a manipulator who had stolen what rightfully belonged to her. She threatened to destroy my career, to tell everyone I worked with that I was not who I claimed to be, to make sure I never knew a moment of peace for the rest of my life. What she did not notice in her rage was the security camera mounted above my door. The building had installed them 2 years earlier, with clearly posted signs reading, "Recording in progress" on every floor. Her entire tirade was captured in high-definition video, complete with audio. The mandatory mediation hearing took place 6 weeks later. Lily arrived with her new attorney, a man who looked increasingly uncomfortable as my lawyer, Sarah Chen, presented our response to the contest. Sarah was methodical and devastating. She began with the private investigator's report that Dad had commissioned documenting Lily's scheme from its earliest stages. She followed with the security footage of Lily's threatening visit to my apartment. Then came the text messages, dozens of them, showing a pattern of harassment and intimidation that had escalated steadily since the will reading. Finally, she presented evidence of Lily's 20-year history of emotional manipulation, including statements from family friends who had witnessed her behavior over the decades. The judge listened to everything with the expression of growing distaste. When Lily's attorney attempted to argue that the DNA evidence proved I had no rightful claim to the estate, the judge cut him off. The will explicitly acknowledged my parentage, she noted. The deceased had made his wishes clear, with full knowledge of all relevant facts. There was no fraud to uncover because nothing had been hidden. She dismissed the contest as frivolous and invoked the no contest clause. Lily forfeited her remaining 30% of the inheritance. The $200,000 she had borrowed from Dad over the years, previously documented as advances on her inheritance, converted automatically to personal debt owed to the estate. In the span of a single afternoon, Lily went from expecting to inherit everything to owing more money than her house was worth. I watched her face as the judge delivered the ruling. For just a moment, I saw something beneath the anger, a flicker of the little sister I remembered from childhood, before jealousy and entitlement had hardened her into someone I no longer recognized. Then it was gone, replaced by cold fury, as she stormed out of the courtroom without a word. Mom came to see me that evening. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her, diminished by the weight of secrets she had carried for 35 years. She sat on my couch with a cup of tea she never drank, and she finally told me the truth. Richard Hayes was not a stranger who had appeared briefly in my mother's life. He was my father's closest friend, his college roommate, the best man at my parents' wedding. When my parents discovered that Dad was infertile, their marriage nearly collapsed under the strain. Mom wanted children desperately. Dad felt like a failure. They separated for almost a year, during which time Mom found comfort with Richard, the one person who understood both of them, who loved them both, who wanted to help them find a way forward. When Mom discovered she was pregnant, the three of them made a decision together. Richard would step back completely, never claiming me as his own, never interfering in my upbringing. Dad would raise me as his daughter, giving me his name and his protection, and Richard would help save Carter Industries, which was failing at the time, providing the capital that kept our family business alive. 2 attorneys witnessed and documented the agreement, Mr. Harrison for my parents, and another lawyer for Richard. They established specific conditions for what would happen if the truth ever emerged. Mom wept as she told me this. She said she had always intended to tell me someday, but the right moment never came. She admitted that Lily's discovery of the secret at 16 had changed everything, giving her younger daughter leverage that she used ruthlessly for 2 decades. She apologized for the favoritism, for the neglect, for allowing fear to shape how she treated her own children. I listened without interrupting. When she finished, I did not offer comfort. I simply told her I needed time to process everything she had said. The next day, Mr. Harrison called to explain the final piece of the puzzle. The agreement signed 35 years ago had included specific trigger conditions for a trust that Richard Hayes had established in my name. The trust would activate if either of 2 conditions were met: my non-biological relationship to Mr. Carter being formally acknowledged in legal proceedings, or Mr. Carter's will explicitly referencing my parentage upon reading. The will reading had satisfied the second condition, automatically notifying Richard's attorney to release the trust. Richard had died 5 years ago, but he had spent decades building this trust for me. He had added to it regularly, watching my life from a distance he had promised to maintain, never reaching out, but never looking away. His attorney delivered a package containing the trust documents and a letter Richard had written shortly before his death. I read his words alone in my apartment, tears streaming down my face. He wrote that he could not be my father in life because he had made a promise, and he was a man who kept his promises. But he had watched me from afar, seen my graduations, tracked my career, observed how I was treated by the family he had helped create. He saw how I struggled, how I was overlooked, how I built myself into someone strong, despite receiving so little support. His letter said, this was not guilt. This was pride. I was his greatest accomplishment, even though I never knew he existed. In the days that followed, I made decisions about how to handle everything I had inherited. I reviewed the estate's financial records personally and confirmed that Lily had withdrawn $50,000 from Dad's accounts during his final months when he was too ill to notice. Under California law, this constituted elder financial abuse, a prosecutable offense. I had every right to press charges. Instead, I chose a different path. Through my attorney, I offered Lily a choice: repay the $50,000 within 1 year or face criminal prosecution. Combined with the $200,000 she already owed and the loss of her inheritance, this would force her to sell her house and start over from nothing. But she would not go to prison. She would have a chance to rebuild if she was willing to take it. For Mom, I established a modest monthly allowance from the estate, enough to cover her basic needs, not enough to maintain the lifestyle she had grown accustomed to. She would have to downsize to adjust to live with the consequences of choices made long ago. This was not forgiveness. This was boundaries with consequences. The difference mattered to me. In Richard Hayes's package, beneath the legal documents and the letter explaining 35 years of watching from afar, there was one more thing, a small wooden box I had not yet opened. I was not ready. But I knew whatever was inside represented a lifetime of love, from a father who chose to stay away so I could have a family, even if that family never deserved me. 3 months passed before I found the courage to open the wooden box. It sat on my nightstand through the final legal proceedings, through the sale of my apartment, through all the decisions that would reshape my life. Some nights I would pick it up and hold it, feeling its weight in my hands, knowing that whatever was inside represented something precious from a man I had never met. But I was not ready. I needed to finish becoming the person who deserved to receive it. The morning I finally opened it was unremarkable, a Sunday in late spring. Coffee growing cold on the kitchen counter, sunlight streaming through windows I had chosen myself. I lifted the lid slowly, and inside I found a watch. It was old, clearly well worn, the leather band softened by decades of use. The face was simple, no fancy complications, no expensive brand name, just honest craftsmanship that had stood the test of time. Beneath the watch lay a folded note written in handwriting I had never seen before, but somehow recognized as belonging to me. I wore this every day, Emily. Every time I checked it, I thought of you. I wondered if you were happy, if you were loved, if you were becoming the person I believed you could be. The answer to those first two questions was often no, and I couldn't interfere. That was the price of my promise, the cost of giving you a family I hoped would treat you better than they did. This watch counted every hour I wished I could have spent with you. Every birthday I wanted to call, every graduation I attended from the back row, leaving before anyone could see me, every time I saw you struggling and had to walk away. Now let it count the hours of the life you deserve, the life you earned, the life I always knew you would build for yourself. I held the watch against my chest and cried. Not the tears of grief I had expected, but something else entirely, the release of a loneliness I had carried for 35 years without understanding its source. I had spent my entire life feeling invisible, unloved, like something was fundamentally wrong with me that made me unworthy of the affection others receive so easily. Now I understood that I had never been alone. Someone had been watching, caring, proud of me, loving me from a distance I never knew existed. The weight I had carried was not proof of my inadequacy. It was simply the price of a promise made before I was born by a man who loved me enough to let me go. I put on the watch that morning, and I have not taken it off since. The Carter family home sold within weeks of listing. I did not attend the final walkthrough or the closing. I hired professionals to pack up what remained and donate anything I did not want, which was nearly everything. Too many memories lived in those rooms, and none of them were warm. The money from the sale, combined with my inheritance from both fathers, gave me options I had never imagined possible. But I did not want a mansion or a luxury apartment or any of the status symbols that had mattered so much to the family I was leaving behind. I bought a cottage, small, old, slightly worn around the edges, exactly like me. It had a garden that had been neglected for years, full of potential, waiting to be coaxed back to life. The kitchen was tiny but bright. The bedroom looked out over a pond where ducks gathered in the mornings. The first night I slept there, I listened to the silence and realized I had never known peace before. I had only known the absence of conflict, which is not the same thing at all. I filled my cottage with books I had always wanted to read, but never had time for. I learned to garden, making mistakes and learning from them without anyone telling me I was doing it wrong. I painted the walls colors I loved without asking permission or seeking approval. For the first time in 35 years, every decision was mine alone. No one to please, no one to prove wrong, no one measuring my worth against standards I could never meet. I discovered slowly and with some surprise that I actually liked the person I was when no one was telling me I was not enough. My relationship with Mom settled into something distant but functional. We spoke on the phone once a month, brief conversations about nothing important. She asked about my health, my work, my garden. I answered politely without offering details. We did not spend holidays together. We did not pretend to be close. The warmth that might have existed between us had been sacrificed long ago on the altar of secrets and favoritism, and I had no interest in pretending otherwise. She had made her choices. Now she lived with them. There was no punishment in my distance, just the natural consequence of decades spent being her lesser daughter. With Lily, there was nothing at all. She called repeatedly in the weeks after the mediation, leaving voicemails that ranged from tearful apologies to furious accusations. I deleted them without listening past the first few words. She sent emails I never opened. She tried reaching me through mutual acquaintances who quickly learned not to pass along her messages. When she was forced to sell her house to cover the debts she owed, the $200,000 in loans, the $50,000 in restitution, the legal fees from her failed contest, she sent me a letter. I recognized her handwriting on the envelope and almost threw it away unopened. But something made me read it just once. She wrote about how unfair everything was, how I had stolen what belonged to her, how Dad had been manipulated and the courts had failed her, and none of this was her fault. She asked for money. She asked for forgiveness. She asked me to remember that we were sisters, as if that word still meant something after everything she had done. I read the letter once, then dropped it in the trash. I felt nothing, not anger, not satisfaction, not even the grim pleasure of watching karma deliver its verdict. Just nothing. Lily's ruin was not revenge. It was simply what happened when a lifetime of manipulation finally met a wall it could not charm or threaten or scheme its way through. She had built her own trap and walked into it willingly. I owed her nothing, not even the energy of hatred. The idea for the foundation came to me on a quiet evening, sitting in my garden as the sun went down. I thought about all the children growing up right now in homes like the one I had survived, the unfavored ones, the overlooked ones, the ones whose worth was measured against siblings who could do no wrong. I thought about how different my life might have been if someone had reached out, offered help, told me that the way I was treated was not my fault and not my destiny. I named it the Hayes Carter Foundation, honoring both the father who raised me, knowing I was not his blood, and the father who loved me from a distance he chose to keep. The foundation provides therapy scholarships for adults healing from family trauma, career mentoring for those rebuilding their lives after escaping toxic systems, and emergency support for anyone who needs help getting out. It is small for now, but it will grow. And every person it helps will be proof that pain can become purpose, that wounds can become wisdom, that the unloved child can grow up to spread love in ways her family never imagined. Tonight I sit in my garden as the sun sets, wearing Richard's watch, a book closed on my lap. My cottage glows warm behind me. The ducks have settled on the pond for the evening. I am not waiting for anyone. I am not trying to prove anything. I am not healing, I am healed. I look at the watch on my wrist and think of two men who both chose to love me in their own imperfect ways. One raised me, knowing the truth, and left me his legacy. One watched from afar and left me his pride. Both of them saw something in me that I could not see in myself for 35 years. My sister gave me a DNA test to prove I did not belong. Instead, it proved that two fathers, one who raised me, one who watched from afar, both chose me when they did not have to. In the end, the greatest inheritance was not the money or the property. It was finally understanding that I was always worthy of love. I just had to stop waiting for the wrong people to see it. Emily's story teaches us something that many of us learn too late in life. Your worth is not determined by how your family treats you. The people who should love you the most sometimes fail you the deepest, and that failure says everything about them and nothing about you. If you grew up as the overlooked child, the unfavored one, the daughter, who could never measure up no matter how hard she tried, please hear this. Their inability to see your value was their blindness, not your flaw. This story also reminds us that secrets and manipulation eventually collapse under their own weight. Lily spent 20 years building a fortress of lies and schemes, believing she was securing her future. Instead, she was constructing her own prison. The truth has a way of surfacing, and when it does, those who built their lives on deception find themselves with nothing solid left to stand on. But perhaps the most important lesson is this healing does not require revenge. Emily did not destroy her sister. She simply stopped protecting her from consequences. She did not punish her mother. She simply established boundaries. There is profound power in choosing peace over vengeance, in walking away whole rather than staying to fight. Sometimes the greatest victory is building a beautiful life and letting that be your answer to everyone who doubted you. If this story touched your heart, if you saw yourself in Emily's struggle, or if you simply love stories about justice and healing, I hope you will subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story like this one. Leave a comment below and tell me, have you ever discovered a family secret that changed everything? Or have you had to establish boundaries with people who were supposed to love you? Your stories matter, and I would love to hear them.
Thank you for listening to this story until the end. Hopefully every moment in the story has touched your heart, brought you some reflection, some emotion, and hope. Thank you for taking the time to experience it with us, and hope that each next story will always accompany you on your life journey.